Hey, just before we start the show, I just want to let you know we've got a new feature here that allows you to leave us a recorded message. I know sometimes there are things we're going to say on the show that you take issue with, that you agree with, we've missed the point, whatever it might be. So it's simple. Just go to the show notes and you'll find a link there that allows you just hit the record button, have your say, and it'll land in our inbox. And we'll probably include it in upcoming shows. So thanks for doing that. Now here's the show.
An original
from Story Studio Network.
Well, here we go. It's Thursday, November the 23rd, and not just another day on the calendar. Happy Thanksgiving to our friends in the U.S. And, you know, with everything that's going on, I think we could all use a kind of just a down day to take stock of what we're grateful for. There's enough going on. Boy, that story yesterday out of Niagara Falls. I was sitting here in the studio. We were working on a show, and that popped up on the screen. I thought, oh. Anyway, if there's good news, so to speak, it was not a terror attack. But nonetheless, everybody's on edge given what's going on around the world. All the noise around the hostage release slowing down because that has been stalled. Not quite sure why. I mean, it could be any reason why. So that's still agonizingly slow and playing itself out in the Middle East. But as I said, I'm sure that no matter what's going on in your life, you can probably just take a few minutes and think about, there's something I'm grateful for. And we extend that to, again, our friends in the U.S. who are celebrating today. There'll be football to watch. All the Black Friday craziness. Although I guess Black Friday probably starts like 3 weeks ago, right? It's not like it used to be. And then on Tuesday is Giving Tuesday. So maybe that's the kind of thing. Take stock of what you're grateful for and then find your favorite charity and support them how you can, whether it's volunteering, whether it's, sorting food at the food bank, make a donation, whatever it might be. Or maybe you want to find out how you can get involved in the Habitat for Humanity build. That's always fun. Remember when I was at Global, I was the news director of Global Television in Toronto. And we were doing a story about a family that was involved with Habitat. And it was a really cool story because they had a family of like 13 kids or something, just this. And they needed a place to live that accommodated them, accommodated their life and the comings and goings and so on. And so we did the story and we followed it through the build. But what we also did was we took a day and we, asked people in the newsroom, sign up and go out there. And people had a whole new appreciation for what goes on at Habitat for Humanity because they got to swing a hammer or cut the lumber or whatever it was they were doing that day. And the nice part about the story was at the end of it, they just wanted a kitchen or a dining room table that they could all sit around. And so the folks dug in and they found somebody to donate the table for the family. And it just turned into this really cool story. And I think when you're involved in offering up that sweat equity, so to speak, because that's what the families have to do, they're moving into those homes. But when you volunteer on the site, I think you get a whole new appreciation of what's going on. And all of that came to mind this past week when we heard about the passing of Rosalind Carter. And of course, she and President Carter, and I say this with all due respect, literally they are the image, the patron saints of the Habitat and the mission. They weren't there at the very beginning, but as soon as they sort of jumped on board and made it their mission, I think that kind of elevated it in just the general culture across North America and around the world. And you will remember that the Carters were in Canada for the 150 celebration, and they were in Edmonton, and the mission there was to be part of the build of 150 homes to celebrate our country. So to hear of her passing on the weekend, I thought, we should probably revisit that. As we're coming into Thanksgiving, it's a good time to talk about it. As we're coming into Giving Tuesday, it's a good time to talk about it. Julia Deans is the president and CEO at Habitat for Humanity, joining us this morning from the West Coast and getting up very early to do this. Thank you. How are you?
Good morning. Great to be here. Thank you.
Just your own kind of reflections on Rosalind Carter, the Carters generally, what kind of passion did they light under the Habitat mission?
Well, they were huge. And as you said, Habitat for Humanity had been founded in 1976. So about 8 years before they got involved, but so many people around the world associate them so closely with the organization that they think they founded it. And that's because they really were the face and such huge global ambassadors. So they took what was really a nascent organization and brought global awareness to everything that we do, and this vision of a world where everyone has a safe and decent place to live. And they took that to heart, and they created that in so many others as well.
Yeah, and I think that's it's interesting at the time. When you talk about Habitat for Humanity and stepping out into the world in the 70s, here in this part of the world, we were still building sort of social housing. We were building government-based housing, so that sort of thing. The housing sector was a completely different world than it is now, and I say that only because, whether by accident or design, it was very prescient to be able to say, there's going to be this kind of need. And if they hadn't planted that seed, 40, 50 years ago, we might be in a bit more trouble than we already are with housing.
It's true. And Habitat's now been involved in touching the lives and the housing situations of about 46 billion people, or 46 million people around the world, which is a huge number. And it started in the farm fields in Georgia, and it was much more about making housing inclusive. So there were many Black sharecroppers who'd grown up with no housing, and it was, how do we bring communities together, white people, Black people, to build housing for people who need it most? So that was the roots, and I think that's the thing that drives us now is we all deserve a safe and decent place to call home, and how do we deliver that? And Habitat gives people hope and a way to do that.
What's the effect? And I said symbolically they were building 150 homes when the Carters came to Canada to celebrate Canada 150. And we think of all the wonderful pictures of the handing off of the keys and it's all finished, right? Take me to that Edmonton community now, and all these years later, what do you know about the families or how that community's grown?
Yeah, well, the wonderful thing about becoming a Habitat homeowner is you're truly setting your family now on a trajectory of improved success, improved health, improved job opportunities, improved education, and you have that place you can call home. So when I meet people in Edmonton, I've been to those homes, they talk about how having that home allowed them to take the higher up job in the hospital because they knew they were going to be able to stay and commit to that, how their kids could now know they were going to go to the same school, invite kids over to play because there was no longer mold in the house. Those are the sorts of things you hear from each and every Habitat home. The Carters actually came to Canada 3 times, and there was the famous trip to Edmonton and Winnipeg for our 150th. But they at one point they came in the early 2000s, and it was a Canadian American trip. So they did builds in Windsor and in 50 communities across Michigan, and they built 6 homes in Windsor, and I think this was 2005. And recently, one of the families who moved in completely paid off their mortgage, and that home has now become a home for another Habitat family. So, that idea of not only is your own family doing better, but you're paying it forward. We're seeing and in connection with these Carter builds. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it is, and it's that whole legacy of sort of paying it forward is an important part of the mission. How many builds would you say you have going at a time in Canada?
It's a matter of hundreds. They're all across the country, and some of them are the small single family homes or duplexes that people probably associate with Habitat. But increasingly, we know there's bigger needs. So we have communities there where Habitat is building multi-unit developments, really exciting one in Peterborough that just opened last year. And in Peterborough, Habitat had been building 1 or 2 houses a year. And they opened a 41 unit condominium development, and it's a home to families, it's a home to single people, couples. But that sort of is the new Habitat. How can we serve more people who are working families and need that hand up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say that's the relatively new model, right, in terms of the builds for Habitat.
Yeah, so we're able to do more things, and that's we're in a position to do that. We've got a lot of people who work with us, thousands of volunteers. We're everywhere in Canada and in 70 countries around the world. So we're all thinking about how can we deliver those housing solutions because the need is just so high.
Does that change the criteria or the qualification to be a Habitat owner if it's a condominium model?
No, it's just another form of ownership, and each Habitat has slightly different parameters. But what we're looking for is working families who have the ability to pay a mortgage. It's never more than 30% of their monthly income, and who are able to contribute volunteer hours so that they are putting into their own build. But they're families who may not be able to or cannot afford a down payment, and who are living in circumstances that are not ones we'd want to be living in. They're in too crowded housing. It's unhealthy. It's unaffordable. And those are the families that we work with.
And in that sort of the application process, it's fairly rigorous, as I recall, in terms of, talking to the people, making sure that they understood exactly what they were getting into, how were they going to contribute. We talk about sweat equity, on the site. I remember talking to a family, and one of the kids was too young to be on the site, so he went and worked at the Restore and helped there. But it's important to underline that first, they have to qualify. Second, they have to be able to pay the mortgage, and that they aren't just given a house for free. And there's still that perception out there.
Yeah, no, you're right. No, these are people who are buying the house, and that's the whole difference between rental and buying a house. It's yours. You are going to be able to save money, build equity, and sometimes that's shared with the local Habitat because this can't be just a ginormous windfall for one family. But you can go away with savings that allow you to invest in the commercial market or public market for housing, and you have that security along the way. So you're right, and the volunteer hours, it's magical. You can share it with your family and with your friends. I met somebody the other day who lived in Toronto, but her mother and her workmates did some of the volunteer work in Calgary. So all hands on deck. The other thing you mentioned is about preparing people to be homeowners, and those of us who've had the joy of owning a home know it's a lot of work. You have to know how to maintain your home. You have to be prepared financially to take on things like a leaking roof or what have you. So there's a lot of home education that accompanies a Habitat homeowner so that they can prepare for that.
We've been talking to the folks here in Toronto at Terrion, and that would be the sort of that home warranty that everybody gets on a new build. I'm assuming that would apply to all the Ontario builds for Habitat, no?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So that kind of education, I think, is a really important part of it in terms of what you're getting into. It's not just that you it's a nice story to say we finally got a table for the whole family to sit around. That's an important part of that experience.
Yeah.
But you're right. Is okay now exactly what do I have to do? How am I protected? What are the things I have to look out for? And again, particularly these days, given the cost of everything, and it brings me to the story I think that might have popped up back in the summer, and it shocked a lot of people to hear that here in Toronto, for example, that Habitat families we're talking about a family income of $100,000, and it shocks people to hear that. Well, how could you be giving a house to somebody who's making $100,000? They should. They're looking through the wrong end of the telescope here. The point is that housing is so expensive in Toronto that $100,000 figure is the 30%, part of the equation. So yeah. It seems, I don't know, was that I hate to say this, but it's almost like wasting a good crisis. The opportunity to really make the point in terms of where we are with the housing crisis, not just in Toronto, right across the country.
Yeah, I think it was a great opportunity, and I hope we used it to say these are the working families we're trying to serve. These are not people who are living with high income. If you think of $100,000, it's an Amazon truck driver and a part-time PSW with 4 kids. That is the family. These are the working families we're trying to serve, and as you said, that is the income that you may need for some of, not all of the Habitat homes. And I would say in Toronto, the average family that we're serving, I think, is around $63,000 in annual income. So that's not a huge amount, but depending on the house, depending on the size of the family, there have been families served who have $100,000 in income, but that's not a huge income, both given the cost of living and the cost of housing. So that is something I think people took to heart. At first, some said, you're serving a whole different group of people. We said, no, that's what this group of people looks like now. And if we serve people who are earning too low an income, they won't be successful as homeowners. And we certainly don't want that. If they're not able to pay part of their mortgage or their property taxes, etc., and they fail, they'd be far behind where they are now, and that would be a catastrophe.
Fall economic statement came out this week and was very quiet on housing. There were a few things in there, but nothing that really seemed to, take the crisis by the throat and said we were going to tackle this. I'm just curious to get your impressions of that.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think we think it is an all hands on deck. This is about government and governments of all kinds, but it's also about builders and developers and the private sector who needs housing to be built, but it's also about individuals. So government doesn't hold it all. I think we were looking to the government to start doing those big things that are going to move the needle, and this was the start. This was certainly not the everything that's needed. There was $15 billion committed to rental housing, and that will start to flow within the next 18 months, I believe. So that's part of the equation, but we have a housing spectrum where people are living without shelter to people living in owned homes, and we need to be moving the needle along all points of that spectrum. So we are looking for further developments. We're looking for the government to take the HST off affordable home ownership, which would be a big help. We're looking for the government to use its funding to force municipalities and provinces to play along and create affordable housing in their communities. And we're looking for the government to make sure that we have the skilled labor we need to get housing built, and that people shouldn't underestimate that. And it involves immigration, it involves skills training. So they've got a lot more things to do, and I think we are expecting them to do it.
Yeah, that the immigration vis-a-vis the capacity in terms of the build is one thing, but there's two sides of the coin there, because as soon as we start to have more immigration, we need more housing. So, and that has been a challenge. And I was talking to Neil Hetherington at the Daily Bread Food Bank last week when they offered up their Who's Hungry report for 2023, and we were talking about it in the context of an incident in Brampton where international students were turned away from the food bank because the impression was the international students have means, they have money. Well, if you break it all down, of course, they barely have what somebody gets on welfare. And Neil was really articulate in terms of how he drew the line there. And it actually did come back to housing to some degree in terms of how we put these folks up and the amount of money that they have to spend. But where, one government underfunds the university, the other government offers up all the visas, unlimited number of visas, and only $10,000 is required to get in the country. Well, how can you pay, rent and everything else on $10,000 a year and still have food and all that kind of thing? So the complication of all of this, there isn't a single area where we've got one solution here. That it's becoming more and more apparent that we need almost a summit on these elements. I mean, you've been on the 2030 Project podcast to talk about the role that housing plays and how important it is to kind of look at it from not just community, but how we mitigate the effects of poverty. it's a really big issue here, and people like you and Neil are out there talking and doing a great job at it. But I don't honestly get the impression that people. I know the government is saying we hear you, but I always ask them, but are you listening? And I wonder at some point how sustainable it is. And I appreciate that it's not just government, but they are creating problems from my perspective that they can solve. And many of them address the issues that you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, we just did our second annual national survey on affordable housing, and the statistics were grimmer. More people are spending 50% or more of their income on rent or mortgages. More people are gloomy about the prospect of ever owning a home. More people are worried about being evicted for not paying rent or rent evicted, especially young people. It's over 60%. So those numbers were grim, but 69% said we believe there are solutions. 80% thought government wasn't doing enough, but 69% thought there were solutions. And to me, that was a source of great optimism because they understand the problem. They think there are solutions, and hopefully they can get behind them. So as our government has to make some of these big choices, we need the public to be standing behind them and saying, we support you in this. We will be comfortable having a lot have 4 houses on it instead of one with lots of garden around it. We are comfortable with people having garden lots. We're comfortable with governments that have create set-asides and give land for affordable housing. And I think the moment is quite something. We all understand that this is not just somebody else. This is our kids. This is the person who works in our hospital, at our school, in our Tim Hortons, and we have to get behind the people with solutions and not stand in their way.
It's interesting as we watch that sort of thing unfold. Again, criticize the federal government all we want. Sean Fraser's been out there in municipalities across, certainly very visible, and saying, here's the program. We're getting shovels in the ground. And the mayors of these municipalities are saying, thank you. They seem to be sort of accelerating those programs. But then within a hair's breadth, you've got the premier standing up and saying, don't do that. So, this is where the politics gets in the way of the policy, right? Yeah. And that just, I don't, maybe we don't have an appetite for it, but to your point, this is where we really kind of need to hold folks accountable for the result. We need outcome here. Yeah, we need to not only be not being NIMBYs, so standing in the way of things, but we need to be asking, what are you doing? What are you doing to create housing? And it's going to affect everybody. It's already affecting many of us. I'm in BC this week. I've been to Tim Hortons where they're only open 4 or 5 hours a day, and it's only at the drive-through because there's nobody to work in the Tim Hortons. So, wow. These are things that are affecting everybody, and it will affect your standard of life and mine if we don't help be part of the solution. You're coming up on almost 4 years in the job. What struck you most about leading the team at Habitat Canada? Well, we're good people. We really want to make change in the world. And we look across our country, we see a huge need for affordable housing. And we're coming up with new solutions to deliver more of that in Canada and around the world. And using our voice, not just for affordable owned homes, but for helping get solutions for people who are living in homelessness, people who are living in transitional housing, and doing much more in partnership. And I think those are all really exciting things. We're trying new techniques. We're doing modular builds. We're working on tiny homes that are going on to Indigenous reserves. So lots of creative people, lots of energy, and hope that we can actually do something more. And that really drives me a lot. We just expand a little bit on the Indigenous communities, because I remember being out at Tyendinaga, and when they were just sort of getting ready to hand the keys over to a couple of families out there. That was at the time, and this is maybe 5 years ago, was something of a breakthrough in as much as I guess Habitat was almost like the facilitator in terms of making sure that we could get all of the jurisdictions in the same room at the table, all agreeing, whether it was the municipalities, it was the First Nation community, et cetera. So it was a little bit more complicated, I hazard to guess, than it might have been otherwise. How, if that was the model, has that expanded across the country, or?
Yeah, there's no one model, and of course our role is to take our cue from the Indigenous leaders and learn from them how we can be helpful to them, and whether it's on reserve or off reserve. So it's responding to what they want and helping make that happen. But there's some wonderful things happening up in Owen Sound. There's been building on reserve of homes. We've got high school students in Halton and Mississauga building tiny homes in shop classes that are then moved to reserve, and they can be used as emergency shelter or for single people who need somewhere to stay. And that's a huge win because it's creating housing, it's getting young people getting skills, and they love it, especially the women. It's driving lots of people into the trades, which is neat. But in some cases, it's not actually building the homes, it's maintaining. And there's been a group from Habitat in Kingston who've gone into a flying community in Northern Ontario to do electrical repairs and brought a team of electricians and spent the week fixing outlets that had been melded together, replacing smoke detectors. So it's working with the communities to figure out what do they need and how do we make that happen. But we have an Indigenous housing program, and we focus very much on delivering housing. And in fact, one of the Carter builds in Canada, I think a quarter or half of the houses they built were for Indigenous families. So this has been something in our DNA for a long time.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you, where we're not just focusing on a specific site anymore. These are things that are happening remotely, just the idea of maintaining the house. That's kind of sounds, I imagine that's a relatively new, I call it an offering from Habitat.
Yeah, it's the repair of homes or critical repair is something that's been a big part of the Habitat in the U.S. It's not been our focus. We've done more building and selling of homes, but we realize it's an incredible way to keep homes affordable. And if you can picture a family where they have a disabled child or parent, and all of a sudden, if they don't get that doorway expanded or the ramp put in, they won't be able to stay. And if they don't stay, the house is probably going to come out of the affordable housing supply. So I think we're recognizing that it's maybe as important to maintain houses in the affordable housing supply as add them.
Yeah. So, and I said off the top, there are a number of ways that, folks can help. What's the greatest need for you in terms of community support?
Well, there are three things. There's always donations. We're in our holiday campaign right now, and money goes a long way. We have wonderful donors of supplies and things, but and time for sure. But money is always needed. Volunteers can get involved on build sites. They can get involved in restores. There's lots of things volunteers can do. And the final thing is people using their voice. And we've talked a bit about that, but asking politicians, what are you doing to solve this problem? Explaining to others that they need to be part of this as well. We have big voices both in Canada and around the world, and we can make change by using them.
Well, Julia, thanks for getting up early in British Columbia. And I hope you get to the drive-thru in time to get your coffee at Tim's this morning. It's been really helpful. Julia Deans is the president and CEO of Habitat for Humanity Canada, and there are ways for you to help. By the way, if you've got a thought on any of this, just a reminder, you can leave us a voice message. Just go to the show notes, click on the record, and leave us your message. And, from time to time, we're going to include those in upcoming shows because there's important stuff to talk about. All right. Tomorrow we have On the Ledge. It's your Ontario Politics podcast. And maybe some of the stuff we just talked about might be coming up as well based on what came out of Ottawa this week. That'll do it. This is Now and Next for Story Studio Network.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
Hey, if you've got thoughts about the show, just leave us a comment and a rating wherever you're listening. And you can also have your say on the show. Just click the record your message link in our show notes. Leave us a comment. Chances are we'll include it in an upcoming episode, and we will definitely respond. Now and Next is produced by me, Dave Trafford, with support and patience of the entire SSN team. Thanks for listening.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.